We're on passage 2. This is a research passage. If you're pressed for time, you could go straight to the questions, but you do need to read, if possible, at least skim. Our DRC approach for the research passage, you read. You don't carefully read, but you at least skim because it has multiple studies. You want to understand the processes described, look at the differences and the different processes. What are they studying between each one? You're probably going to have a question about those differences. This is passage 2. You know it's a research passage because it says study 1, study 2, study 3. I like to read the intro, and then you want to look at the differences in the studies, at least look at the variables that are being presented. Probably 30 seconds to a minute is all you need, and then go to the questions. Our approach to the questions is the R&R approach. So you're going to read the question, and then reread the question. So in your first reading, you're just trying to understand what it's asking, kind of orienting yourself, skimming, if you will. And then your reread, you're really breaking it down step by step. So as we go through it, I'm going to be doing the reread part. Already read it. Hopefully you've already read it, and we're rereading. If you haven't read it before we start, pause the video and read it before we start. Number 7, this question is an example of how ACT takes something that's pretty easy and makes it complicated. According to figure 1, over the 12-month period, the monthly precipitation of the urban site was maximum in February and minimum in July. So look at figure 1, and what you see is true. In February, it's a maximum, and in July, it's the minimum. All that's saying is, hey, this is true. What you're really looking for is the wet disposition of which ion was also maximum in February and July. So you're being asked which ion has a maximum in February, minimum in July, using figures 2 and 3. That's an easy question. If they just said that, super easy. They make it harder though. So let's try to break it down. Let's find February. Okay, so which one's the maximum? If we go by CU2, that one is not maximum. You can see it's bigger in June. If you go with the ZN2 in February, you can see it's bigger in January. If you go with the CL, it is bigger in several months. But when we get down here to the SO4, it is biggest in February. So we actually already have our answer. We don't even need to check July. We know the answer is D. If you want to check July, just to be sure, you can. And you see it's also minimum in July for SO4. So either way, you have your answer. Easy question that's made to be complicated, especially by telling you to look at figure 1. Based on the results of study 1 for CU2, so put your finger on study 1, CU2, the average monthly wet disposition over the 12-month period was. So you can see we're using monthly wet disposition, and ACT really isn't wanting you to add up numbers and get an average. They just want you to kind of guesstimate. So draw a line through about where you think the average is. I'm going to put it about right there. Yours might be a little lower, a little higher. But you can see it's probably about right. We have that tall peak. We have a few below it. Might trend a little more towards the 50. But if it was 50, that would be too low. We have too many points above it. 75 to 100 and 100 definitely too big. So your answer has to be G. Just kind of estimate about where it's going to be. Question number 9, we're looking at study 2. So put your finger on study 2. The values for CL, so we'll make sure they're the right one, greater during the winter than in early spring. So what is winter and early spring? They have winter November to April and spring May to October. So we know where we're looking. So we're basically saying, is November and April, November to April, greater than May to October? If so, then the answer will be yes. So let's look at November to April and May to October. And so it is greater. We can see the numbers are up higher. And so we know we can eliminate C and D. And then Y, choice A and B, because it's greater, not less than. So your answer has to be A. Number 10 is a suppose question. So suppose if Y questions means you have to think a bit. So suppose there had been no precipitation during one entire month of the 12-month period based on the information provided. So that means it's going to come from the reading. during that month there would have been. So now you can look at the answers to see kind of what you're looking for. Significant wet deposition of all four substances, significant wet deposition of some substances, no wet deposition of any of the four. So all four of the studies have a similar collection method, or the same collection method, not similar. So a rain gauge was placed, the amount of precipitation was recorded, the samples were collected and analyzed for concentrations. So they're analyzing the concentration of rain. If there is no rain, there is no concentration to measure, and so therefore there will be no wet deposition of any of the substances. It all depends on examining the rain. That's what the supposed part. You have to make that leap to understand that. So your answer is H. According to study 3, put your finger on study 3, as the distance from the urban site, so the urban site is this one that's in kind of the light colored solid box, increase. So we got to see, well, how far away is rural site 1 and 2? It says they are located 50 and 100 kilometers east, respectively. That means the order that they're listed. So 50 miles away from rural site 1, the dashed one, and then 100 miles from rural site 2. So you can see they both go down. So as the distance increased, the wet deposition decreases. So C. Which of the following variables was kept constant in study 2? This is a reasoning question, knowing what was being studied. So you can't keep rainfall constant, and they're measuring the wet deposition, which depends on the amount of rainfall. So the site is what's constant. The same collection technique was used, which we actually explored in an earlier question. So F.